other seasons of life where I'm doing a lot more jujitsu, I'll double up, where I lift heavy in the morning and then go roll hard later in the day. And depending on what that looks like, I try to use the 48 to 72 hour rule, where we just put high stimulus training days throughout the week, separated by about 48 to 72 hours. It gives you a little bit more time to recover, so that way you're ready to hit it hard again.
So like with you personally, I mean, you're still lifting, you're rolling. How do you structure like nuts and bolts of your training split? 100%, man. So with you having been in jiu-jitsu, you said 8 years now total?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there's been this like hockey stick trend upward in its popularity, like in the last, I would say 3 to 4 years? Because like, and maybe it's correlated with Joe Rogan because he starts talking about things. Like I noticed that with bow hunting, like bow hunting wasn't popular. And then he started having Cam Hanes on his episodes a lot. And Cam Hanes, obviously a super prominent bow hunter. And now everybody wants to be a bow hunter. And I think the same thing is happening with jiu-jitsu, where it's like everybody's now wanting to go roll and emulate that. But have you noticed that as someone that's been in the space for so long?
100%. 100%. I started jiu-jitsu because I was listening to Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink and all that. And even when I started, it was still kind of like, I don't want to say it was underground per se, but it just wasn't mainstream. It just wasn't like, I still had to explain to people, like when I first started jiu-jitsu, I'd go to like Christmas Eve and my aunts would say like, hey, like, what are you up to? And I'd say, oh, I'm doing jiu-jitsu. And they're like, oh, is that like karate? And it's like, no, it's like kind of like wrestling. But anyways, they had no idea. But now when I go to Christmas Eve or whatever, I could just see a total stranger and they say like, oh, do you do jiu-jitsu? And I was like, yeah. They're like, oh man, on Instagram, I see all these jiu-jitsu clips, or I saw that Mark Zuckerberg is doing jiu-jitsu now. So it definitely has kind of had like this explosion. And I think what's cool about that is that that's like the tide that raises all ships. I know for me, that's been great for my own business. The more people that are doing jiu-jitsu is like, the more people I have an opportunity to help, the more people I have an opportunity to work with. And I think what's awesome is that jiu-jitsu is a way to get a community aspect, get some combat sport and martial arts self-defense experience. I know there's people out there that say that jiu-jitsu is not great for self-defense, and maybe like the sport jiu-jitsu where you're like spinning upside down and like doing the splits and stuff, that may not be like the most effective self-defense, but like if you know how to strangle somebody, you know how to like break joints, like that's pretty solid. But you get like the community aspect, you get the self-defense aspect, you get like a lot of good like physical interaction, like it's physically demanding, yet you don't get punched in the face. There are injuries in it, but depending on how you train, there's a lot of things that you can do to decrease your risk of injury. You know, if you're going to be doing stand-up stuff, you can decrease the risk of injury a lot, but there's still a risk that you're going to get clipped with something and get some sort of concussion, either a minor concussion or a major concussion. In jiu-jitsu, if you're training smart, you leave your ego at home and you're not trying to be a hero and like wait till the very last second to tap to something. You can go pretty hard without necessarily having that high of a risk of injury. So I think a lot of those things contributed to what's made it so popular. And it also helps that like MMA is getting more popular. Not everyone's going to do MMA, but there's a lot more people that watch MMA that might do jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu competitions are growing and getting more exciting and more engaging from a production value. So I think there's a lot of things that contribute to that hockey stick effect that we've seen over the last couple of years.
Is there like it's like some unspoken jiu-jitsu etiquette that I would need to know before just walking into a dojo and be like, all right, I'm signing up? Like, what do I need to know so I don't make a fool of myself?
Yeah, honestly, like just be cool, which you're already a cool guy. Like, I think there's like hygiene etiquette. So like, it's definitely a good idea to trim your fingernails. That way you don't like accidentally scratch somebody. Like, not that anyone would ever intentionally like try to claw somebody, but if your fingernails are a little bit long, it's good to trim those. Don't walk on the mat with your shoes on, because like you don't want the rocks from your shoes to like dig into the mat and mess up the mats and stuff. If you already have zebra mats, like I'm sure you're already aware, like those things are pretty pricey. They're really nice. Mm-hmm. So like as much as possible, like keep them clean, keep take care of them, stuff like that. And then honestly, like just, you're already a cool guy. And based on like what you do in life, like with all the hunting, the bodybuilding, entrepreneurship, and all that stuff, you already have like, I don't believe you would be a guy that goes in with this giant ego, you
Yeah.
know, like you're just going in like, hey, like what can I learn? How can I get better today? And there's that side which we can consciously like do our best to be prepared for, but then there's like all these unconscious things that kind of just get fixed with time. So like when I first started doing jujitsu, I would tense up a lot. Like I'd tense up and hold my breath, and that would just completely gas me out. And that's something that you kind of learn over time of like, okay, I probably don't need to tense up really hard in every exchange. I can learn how to relax a little bit. There's other things. I heard someone say like, hey, if something's not working, doing it more aggressively and harder probably isn't the answer. So that was helpful for me. Like, okay, if this technique isn't working, even though I'm strong, I probably don't need to just rip on it as hard as I can to try to figure it out to make it work. There might be another like detail that I'm missing that could make it work a little bit better. But yeah, other than that, it's like just be cool, which you already are, and you'll be just fine.
Yeah, I'll try and be cool for sure. I'm afraid that like because I come from bodybuilding, like I would have a natural tendency to just try to use my strength and overdo it in that regard, as opposed to like actually, technique fixating on that. Because the cool thing about jiu-jitsu is you can have somebody that's 115 pounds and scrawny as hell just totally wipe the floor with somebody that's twice as heavy as them. But it's like, that's all technique, it's not muscle that's moving, that's technique. So I got to just like fixate on that and not rely on the muscle and strength that I've built over decades to try and compensate, basically.
I think I hear what you're saying, and I think unfortunately jiu-jitsu has created a bad stigma around using strength, and that's kind of what made it popular. Was like, oh yeah, Royce Gracie won the first UFC. He wasn't as big and as jacked as some of those other guys, and he submitted all of them, which that is incredible, and that was awesome to see. But I think that message has kind of gotten muddled that like, oh, you don't need strength. And it's like, whoa, let's pump the brakes. That 115-pound guy, like he'll mop up a dude that's bigger than him that doesn't know jujitsu. A bigger guy that knows jujitsu, he's cooked. Like he's getting smashed. And so when people come into jujitsu that are already strong, usually I just encourage them like, hey, you're going to kind of find that you're going to do things a little bit harder and apply a lot more force than most everyone else that has been doing jujitsu. So just try to like intentionally slow down a little bit and just keep like an idea in your head of like, if I'm doing a rowing motion more than 70%, like I might be going and it's not working, I might be going a little too hard. I probably don't need to row like, rip an arm drag, which is kind of looks like a rowing movement. Probably don't need to rip that 100%. Could probably like try to figure it out at around 70%. And then the other thing that helps too is just breathing a lot more. When we tense up and like brace, we're getting ready to like be really explosive. But if you just kind of slow down your breathing a little bit, try to relax a little bit, you can still be strong. You can still, move fluidly and be really effective, but you're not you're not as spazzy, if that makes sense. And I think honestly, like one of the best examples of this is Nsima. Nsima's a black belt. He started training a little bit before I did, and he's like 240, 250 pounds. He's huge, but he moves really, really well. And if you watch him train, he doesn't really like grunt very much. He doesn't really like, you don't really see a lot of like intensity in his face. It doesn't look like he's lifting. And I think sometimes like when people come from lifting and they are super strong, which is great, that's like a huge asset to have and like a great part of athleticism to have. Sometimes they kind of just take how they would lift something like an explosive row or explosive press. They do that for everything. When maybe there's a little bit better rep balance to be had, like, hey, there's a time to be explosive, but a lot of the time, like, try to be a little bit more relaxed, try to be a little bit more fluid, and go from there.
You roll with Nsima?
I don't roll with them too often. No. So I mostly train no gi, so like no pajamas, and Nsima trains mostly in the gi. So occasionally, if I'm showing up to a gi training session and he's there, we might roll. Nsima's awesome, but there are also like, for myself, there are times where like I go in with something very specific that I'm going to work on. And sometimes Nsima and I will work on those. Like, at least for me, there's this thing called the constraints-led approach to jiu-jitsu. We have like very specific training constraints to develop certain skills. And that may not always work with what Nsima's working on or a competition he's prepping for, but we roll occasionally. I wouldn't say I train with him all the time.
So with the gi or no gi, like, is that just kind of like more purist versus more practical? Like, what's kind of like the ideology around the gi versus no gi?
So, to my understanding, jiu-jitsu originated from judo, and they wore the gi. And then when MMA got popular, it didn't make sense to wear the gi because no one's wearing the gi in MMA, or at least after the first few years of MMA, no one was wearing the gi. And that's where no gi kind of became more popular. It's like, hey, why are we learning how to strangle someone with their collars if we're training for an MMA fight and they don't have any collars? We might as well just try to learn all the same stuff, but without the use of the fabric. And so that's kind of where it branched off. And there are a lot of guys that do both. Like, I know I started doing like a even split, like 50% of the days when I started jiu-jitsu were no gi, 50% were in the gi. Now it's like 95-5. Like every couple weeks I might do one gi session. But because I came from wrestling, which we just wore a singlet, it was just a smoother transition just to mostly focus on no gi.
Yeah. Because I guess with the gi training, like, you're pretty much making your decisions based off of them wearing that. So like all of your hand positioning is all around the collar. Like, it just totally changes where you're grabbing. I mean, it changes everything, I guess.
Yeah, it does change a lot. Like there's specific grips. Like if you were to try to grab someone's tricep like this, like it would be really hard to control someone because like might be able to get it, but it's kind of easy for them to just pull their arm off. But if you grab like the sleeve, that's a super strong grip that you can have on the back of someone's tricep. That's pretty hard for them to break. So there's little things like that, like different grips. There's different submissions too that you can do. But I'd say like probably 70% of it crosses over between both. Like all the principles around like, hey, if we're going to protect our neck, the principles of protecting your neck, whether you're wearing a gi or no gi, are pretty similar. You want to defend your neck. You want to make sure their hands aren't getting around and under your chin, stuff like that. So there's quite a bit of crossover.
Makes sense. What do you look for? This is a selfish question, but what do you look for in like a good quality school or dojo for jiu-jitsu? Like, what do I need to keep in mind when because there's one that I know is relatively reputable, like 25 minutes from me. I'm kind of in the middle of the country though. Like, should I shop around, or what would you base that off of?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think it's great to shop around, like take as many trial classes as you want at all the gyms in town. And I never thought of this because I don't have any kids, but one guy that I train with, someone asked him this question on a podcast, and he said, look at their kids program. If their kids program is really strong, that's a great sign. Because if there's a lot of parents that trust this instructor or this group of instructors consistently enough to bring their kids there 2 to 3 times a week, that's a really good sign. That's a good sign that they know what they're doing. They got their business taken care of. They create a good environment for kids to learn in. That's going to transfer better to adults. It doesn't always work on the other side. Like there may be a gym that has like a ton of competitors, a ton of MMA fighters, and they might have some kids classes, but it's like some teenager that doesn't know what he's doing, having kids. It's like rock'em sock'em robots on the mat and stuff. That may not be the best place unless that's what you're looking for. Like when I first started jiu-jitsu, I trained at an MMA gym. I didn't have any kids. I was like, I don't care what the kids class is like I'm just going to throw down. But like what you said, if the goal is to do it with your son, I'd err on the side of like find a place that has a really good established kids program. And then all the other things too, like if you walk in and it smells clean and it looks clean, that's a great sign. If you walk in and like the bathrooms are an absolute mess, like there's sweat everywhere and no one mops up, like I'd say like that's a little bit of a red flag. There's also some stuff. Thankfully, the place that I train at isn't like this at all. And I didn't even know about this until after I'd already been doing jiu-jitsu for a couple years. But there are some places that are a little bit, for lack of a better term, they're just a little bit cultish. Like the instructor wants you to only wear a white gi with the school patch on it. You can't wear anything else. And you have to like, when you tie your belt, you have to face away from the mat and you have to ask to use the bathroom before you leave. Like I understand that for kids, like you want to build like a culture of respect and a culture of discipline and all that stuff. But once you're an adult, like you're a grown ass man. I'm a grown ass man. I'm not asking anyone to go to the bathroom. Like if I got to go to the bathroom, I'm going to the bathroom. I'm not going to be like bowing to a picture of a dead guy on the wall or any like weird stuff like that. So there's some stuff that has kind of transferred over from like super, super old school traditional Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which I don't, the place I train at now, Cassio, he's from Brazil and he's awesome. Like we bow at the end of class, just as like not like as any weird thing, but just like, hey, class is over, bow out, that's it. But he doesn't care like what gi you wear. He doesn't care if you go to the bathroom. Like he's pretty chill about all that stuff.
Nice. Yeah, cool deal, man. Yeah, I'll check it out for sure. I'm assuming with like a 3 to 5 year old age group for them, they're doing like just basics. Like they're not going to be strangle holding on week 2, I wouldn't think.
No. I think what's cool about jiu-jitsu for little kids is that it's oftentimes like gymnastics with a little bit of like grappling involved. Like a lot of tumbling, a lot of like somersaults and stuff like that with a little bit of like, hey, this is how, you do a takedown or this is how you do whatever.
Nice. So anything is better than nothing, obviously, but like how many days a week would one need to commit to going after it to like see a measurable improvement, and not like overdo it necessarily, but like not just tipping their toe in?
That's a great question. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make when they first start jiu-jitsu, especially if they're like someone like you and me, where like once we catch the bug on something, like it's all gas, no brakes on that one thing. And I think a lot of times people will go way too hard, way too fast, where they like try to train 4 or 5 days a week at jiu-jitsu and they physically haven't caught up to be able to handle that kind of workload or that kind of training volume. And we could almost look at it as like, if someone wanted to go running and they haven't ran before and they're like, oh, I watched this David Goggins video. He ran 100 miles. Well, I'll just do half that. I'll run 50 miles. It's like, whoa.
I did that same thing. Listen to his podcast and I signed up for a marathon on the spot.
Oh, no. I didn't mean to blast you out like that, but there is like there does need to be a slight progression in how much time you're spending on the mat if you want to be able to do it for a long period of time. So for someone who's just starting jiu-jitsu, if they're in decently good shape, I'd say like 2 days a week is perfect. Like 2 days a week, if you could do that every week for say like 2 to 3 months and are able to successfully recover well, you could probably do more. But if you're, like you said, your main goal is to like still be competitive as a bodybuilder and still make strides in that, I think doing more than 2 days a week might have a negative impact on that. After a few months though, once you get familiar enough with it, you will also get much better at kind of auto-regulating your training. So with some guys that I coach, I've noticed that the guys that are more experienced, they can have a lot of days on the mat and recover pretty well because they're just so much better at auto-regulating training. With the people you coach, maybe you've experienced this where someone's brand new to the gym and it's like, hey, we're going to have you go to the gym twice a week and we'll have you do like lighter stuff at home the other days of the week. That way you're still doing physical activity, but you really only have like 2 hard workouts. It's once someone is more experienced and they've gotten a better handle of the gym, you might have them go to the gym 5 days a week, but they kind of intuitively know, okay, days 1 and 4 are the days I really push it. Days 2, 3, and 5, a little bit lighter. Still able to get some good work in, but I'm better able to manage intensity and manage my fatigue and stuff like that. So jiu-jitsu works very similarly. Say 2 days a week to start is pretty solid. And then the other thing too is when it comes to the live sparring aspect, you definitely don't have to spar every single round. I think that's another thing that messes people up. They're not used to doing that much live grappling and they feel like they have to do every single round. I'd say like the first few weeks, just do half and then, do a round, take a round off, watch, do another round, take a round off and watch. Then as you get a little bit more familiar, you start to get used to like the rigors and the stresses of grappling, start doing more rounds, maybe add another day of jiu-jitsu. I think when jiu-jitsu guys ask me, oh, how many days should I go to the gym? I say, just go to the gym as many days as you can every week, just as long as it doesn't negatively impact your jiu-jitsu training and negatively impact your overall recovery. For some guys, that's 2 days. For some guys, that's 4 days. And I think looking at it from the flip side of the coin is also very similar. So if you're bodybuilding and you're, lifting and all that stuff, go to jiu-jitsu as many days as you can per week, just as long as it doesn't have any negative impact on your bodybuilding training. When you're just starting out, that may be 2 days a week. If you're someone like my guy Tyler, who's a black belt and competes at Mr. Olympia, he can probably go to jiu-jitsu every day and do something and be totally fine. But that comes with experience, comes with having a better understanding of auto-regulation and all that stuff.
Nice. No, it makes total sense. So like with you personally, I mean, you're still lifting, you're rolling. How do you structure like nuts and bolts of your training split, jiu-jitsu split, nutrition? Like how are you structuring everything?
Yeah. So right now I'm only training jiu-jitsu about twice a week. Things have been pretty busy with work, and I just finished a big bulk. So I was like, I'm leveraging as much time as I can to be in the gym. But from like on average, I'd say I go to the gym about 3 to 4 days a week, and I'm going to jiu-jitsu on average about 3 to 4 days a week. When I was competing, I was going to the gym a little bit less and going to jiu-jitsu a lot more. In 2020, when I didn't have jiu-jitsu, I was going to the gym a lot more because that's all I could do. But for me, a typical week of training, I structure it using the condensed conjugate split. So, conjugate system came from a lot of the strength coaches in the Soviet Union, then got really popular in the United States in powerlifting circles and guys like Louis Simmons. And basically, the conjugate system is focusing on using 3 main training methods. You have your max effort method, your dynamic effort method, and your repetition effort method. The max effort method, you can almost think of like that's the heavy strength work. It looks like working up to a 3-rep max on some big compound lifts, squat, bench press, deadlift, overhead press, stuff like that. Dynamic effort method is most of your speed and explosive power work. So that could be speed bench press or speed squats, but it could also include other things like jumping, med ball slams, kettlebell swings. If you got some hills, you can do hill sprints, stuff like that. And then the repetition effort method is kind of like the glue that puts those two things together. You have your bodybuilding training, a little bit more of your GPP or general physical preparedness or general fitness work. And so throughout the week, I make sure that I'm checking all 3 of those boxes. And the condensed conjugate model is something I picked up from Phil DeRue. He's a MMA strength and conditioning coach. And that's basically a way of how you can combine some of those methods in your workouts to try to check all those boxes throughout the week. So one workout may look like a max effort lower, dynamic effort upper. So we'll start the workout with something really heavy for the lower body. That may be some sort of squat, some sort of deadlift, or some sort of good morning, working up to a 1 to 5 rep max. We'll pick 1 to 2 secondary exercises. So like say we do a squat and we work up to a heavy triple or a heavy set of 3. I'm not necessarily trying to like always hit the biggest eyeball popping, gut busting, heaviest set ever, but I want to hit some heavy weight. I want to do something heavy, strain against some heavy loads for that workout. So say we start with a squat. Secondary exercises might be like some sort of lunge or some sort of unilateral heavy lower body movement for 4 to 6 sets, 4 to 6 reps. So that kind of covers the max effort method for the lower body. Then we'll move to the upper body and do all of our speed and explosive power work. So plow push-ups, med ball slams, maybe even like some speed bench press. There's a bunch of different things that you can do with that. And that'll be one workout. So we check 2 of those boxes. And then the next workout may look like the exact opposite. So max effort upper, dynamic effort lower. So we hit the heavy bench press for 3 reps, do some heavy pull-ups, heavy rows. Then we do something fast and explosive for the lower body. Sprints, jumps, banded kettlebell swings, stuff like that. And then on day 3, this is something that I picked up from Mark Bell. I like to call those the jacked and tan days, where it's just all bodybuilding stuff. So you're hitting all your repetition effort method exercises. That could be like gangstering out on arms, it really can be like as deep into bodybuilding as you want to take it. And then some other guys that I coach, they're not as much of a meathead as myself. So I have them do a little bit more like circuit based stuff. But the goal is really just to get a lot of blood flow, get a crazy pump, leave the gym feeling better than when you walked in. And so those are kind of like the three main workouts that I do. And I'll kind of like swap in different exercises, swap in like different sets and reps just based on whatever the overall training goal is. So if I'm bulking and like going through a big hypertrophy phase, some of those max effort movements may be large range of motion, trying to get a really big, deep stretch, exercises that may not be the absolute best for overall strength, but are really, really good for hypertrophy. So instead of doing like a 3-rep max box squat, which could be great for strength, I might do like an 8-rep max hack squat, or maybe an 8-rep max RDL or stiff leg deadlift. If the goal is to prep for competition, some of the guys that I'm coaching are gearing up to compete at Master Worlds here in a couple weeks. We're really trying to focus on getting a really big strength stimulus without having a lot of wear and tear. So that might look like a trap bar deadlift, but they let go of the bar at the top, so they don't have as much eccentric loading. That may look like split squats with overcoming isometrics. So they like get a barbell, get into a split squat position, but just rip into the pins as hard as possible. They're able to get a huge training stimulus, but not necessarily have a whole lot of wear and tear. So that way they have plenty of energy to go train hard at jiu-jitsu. So the condensed conjugate model is like the outline that I typically use for myself and a lot of the athletes that I coach. And then we dive into the specific exercises and sets and reps just based on whatever their training goals are or their training needs are.
And do you alternate those days with your jiu-jitsu training? So like, heavy day, then your jiu-jitsu, then the dynamic day and split, or how do you have that weaved in?
So it depends on the athlete. For me, since I'm only doing 2 jiu-jitsu days per week, I lift only on one day and then I go to jiu-jitsu on another day. Other seasons of life where I'm doing a lot more jiu-jitsu, I'll double up where I lift heavy in the morning and then go roll hard later in the day. And depending on what that looks like, I try to use, I think some people call it the high-low method, and I've also heard some people call it the 48 to 72 hour rule, where we just put high stimulus training days throughout the week, separated by about 48 to 72 hours. So instead of doing a really hard workout on Monday and then a really hard jiu-jitsu session on Tuesday, and then trying to do another really hard workout on Wednesday, that can work early in the week. But by the time you get to the end of the week, you've accumulated so much fatigue that it's going to be really hard to give it your best on Friday and Saturday. If you combined your hard workout with your hard jiu-jitsu session on Monday, and then take things a little bit easier on Tuesday, that gives you a little bit more time to recover. So that way you're ready to hit it hard again on Wednesday. So that is typically how I set it up for myself and then the athletes that I coach. If they're doing so much jiu-jitsu to where they're going to have some double days where they're lifting heavy and rolling hard in the same day, we use that high-low method where we have a day that's high stimulus followed by a day that's low stimulus, or at least a day where they're able to get a little bit more recovery. So that way they don't accumulate as much fatigue throughout the week.
Makes sense. How long are your sessions on average for the training and the jiu-jitsu?
For me, I love being in the gym. So I'm there at least for like 90 minutes and sometimes longer. And then jiu-jitsu is usually like 90 minutes to 2 hours. But for athletes that I'm coaching that like jiu-jitsu is their main thing, I try to make sure their workouts are no longer than 75 minutes. It's like, I know like how people say like, oh, serum testosterone starts to drop off after about 75 minutes of exercise and all that stuff. But I just love being in the gym. So I'd rather like be in the gym as long as possible, even though I know like they may not always be conducive to what science says. I just love being in the gym. So for me personally, my workouts are a little long. My jiu-jitsu sessions are a little long, but this is what I do and this is what I love doing. For someone else that either has a tighter schedule or maybe doesn't enjoy lifting as much, you definitely don't need to be in the gym for 90 plus minutes to get a good training stimulus. Like a lot of guys that I coach, their workouts are 45 to 60 minutes tops, and then they're doing jiu-jitsu for 60, 75 minutes a day.
Nice. Tell me about this bulk you just did. What was the motivation behind that?
Oh man, I just finished a cut. Like even though I'm not competing in bodybuilding, the stuff that I learned from doing that bodybuilding show has been amazing. Like learning how to get really, really lean and really, really shredded, I think is a skill that a lot of people should have, or at least like dabble in a little bit. And so last year, like last spring, I was kind of like going through a lot of maintenance in my training. And I'd love to hear from you too, if you've ever experienced this, where sometimes things with work and just other stuff going on in life, like get so crazy that training is just like, I'm just going to like just maintain. And my gym sessions are just going to be about maintaining, making sure that I'm constantly putting up points on the scoreboard, not missing any workouts, but realistically, I'm not going to like put my full intent to like PR my squat or something like that. And so I was kind of in that maintenance phase for a little bit too long, where after a while I realized like, I gotta like turn up the heat and do something, you know, if I'm not going to be competing in jiu-jitsu, I at least got to be able to push myself in the gym. And so I just set a goal of like, I'm just going to get crazy shredded, get as lean as I possibly can. And so I did that. And then at the end of that, I maintained for a little while. And I'm sure every bodybuilder or anyone that loves gym culture kind of goes through this. You love the part where you're actively getting leaner and leaner and leaner. And then you stay lean for like 6 to 8 weeks and you realize like, man, I feel kind of weak. I should probably try to get big. So then you start bulking up again. That's basically what I did. So I've bulked for 24 weeks. And then the last 12 weeks have just been maintenance, which I feel pretty good, but I'm also ready to start leaning out again. So probably start that here pretty soon.
Like tracking macros and conscious of how many calories you're eating in a bulk and versus a cut and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I've done a few different diets, some that were really heavy on tracking, some that were a little bit more intuitive, some that were a little bit more restrictive, where it's like, hey, I can eat as much as I want, but I'm just not eating these particular foods or whatever the case may be. And over the years, I've found that for me, tracking macros has been what's worked best just for my overall athletic development, because I know very specifically of like, hey, this is how much I need to feel and perform my best. Like I know, like I've tested it. I know that when I have 30 to 40 grams of fast digestible carbohydrates right before jiu-jitsu, I feel really, really, really good. I also know that when I have, you know, much higher carbs and a lot lower fat, like a more traditional bodybuilding style diet, I feel really, really good. I also know on the other hand that there are specific foods that tend to mess up my digestion a little bit or cause me to not feel as good. So kind of like the outline that I use for a lot of people that I coach is like, before we start tracking macros, let's just get your food selection on point. Like for the next 8 to 12 weeks, I only want you to eat what has a mom or comes from the ground, and then get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And they might say like, well, coach, what about this, this, and this? It's like, does it have a mom? Like, well, it came in a box at the grocery store. It's like, okay, well, yeah, you should probably like skip that for the next 8 to 12 weeks. So I kind of build out that foundation. And then based on those foods, those nutrient dense whole food sources, then we kind of move into tracking macros. And it's like one guy might say, hey, you know, I'm following the diet. Like I can see that I'm getting leaner and decreasing body fat, but I just always feel so exhausted at jiu-jitsu. It's like, all right, well, what are you eating before jiu-jitsu? And they're like, God, nothing. It's like, okay, well, maybe have a little bit of fruit, maybe have some nuts in there, just something to get a little bit of fuel for that training session. And so that's kind of the template that I use for a lot of people that I coach. And then that's also the same template that I use for myself. So most of the food is nutrient dense, whole food sources. I'm a big fan of Stan Efferding's vertical diet and all those foods, so like a lot of red meat, a lot of white rice, different things like carrots, cranberry juice, spinach for different micronutrients, and then just making sure that my macros are structured in a way that kind of keeps some guardrails on not eating too much to where the bulk is going a little too fast, where I'm gaining too much body fat, or if I'm leaning out, I'm still getting in plenty of calories to sustain the training that I need throughout the week.
How much higher on calories did you go with your bulk, and like how much weight did you gain in that 24-week span?
So before, I typically would just do like the standard like NSCA recommendation of like, you need to be in a weekly caloric surplus of 3,500 calories per week and all that stuff. And then I listened to Dan Garner. He's Sean O'Malley's nutritionist. He's also a nutritionist for a lot of different hockey players and MMA fighters. And he had like the simplest calculation, which I thought was so genius. He said, maintenance calories is probably your body weight times 15. And then to be in a surplus, it's probably your body weight times 16. And to be in a deficit, it's probably your body weight times 14. And so that's what I did. So I just took my body weight times 15, ran that to get my total caloric intake. And then once I had those total calories for the day, took out my protein, which was 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, then plugged in my fat, which for me, I prefer to have a little bit lower fat, 0.3 to 0.4 grams of fat per pound of body weight, and then just filled the rest with carbohydrates. So I ran that for maintenance and weighed myself every day for a couple weeks to make sure my weight hasn't really fluctuated that much. This is probably pretty close to maintenance. And then when I started the bulk, I just took my body weight times 15, kept the same ratios as far as protein and fat goes, and just added more carbohydrates. When I was going through a cutting phase or leaning out, do the exact same thing. Keep fat and protein pretty much the same, and then just decrease carbohydrates.